Hey everybody, it's Chuck Dixon, back to talk about what it is I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. This is our fourth installment of Ask Chuck Dixon, where I answer questions that you folks have kindly posted for me on Facebook and other places. And let's get started with our first question here. Okay, Stephen Freivogel, Herr Freivogel, he asks, can you tell me about some of the behind the scenes of how you got started writing for Batman? Um, well, it kind of, begins with Denny O'Neil. I had been to DC for interviews, trying to get in, try to get work there. Never really thought about writing Batman because Batman is kind of the gold medal at the Olympics. It's the big prize. It's the one everybody goes after. So I would go up to DC and try to find out if there were any second tier or third tier characters that they had laying about that I could contribute to. But I did end up in an interview kind of with Denny. I remember being interviewed by Dan Raspler, and Denny was sort of in the room pretending not to notice me. But then years later, um, he reached out for me specifically to write Robin, and he teamed me up with Tom Lyle. There we are. Look at these two young kids with a dream. Uh, me and Tom Lyle. Me with my beard and Tom with his mullet. And we were assigned to do the first Robin miniseries to introduce, well, not really introduce, but to explore more Tim Drake's role as Robin in the first miniseries. And it, you know, it was expected to do well, but it far, far, far exceeded DC's expectations. And it kept going back to print over and over and over again. And everybody was very, very tickled with all of the money coming in. And back in those days, comic books rewarded you for merit. If you sold a lot of comic books for them, they wanted you to keep doing more comic books for them. It was kind of redundant hiring. And Tom and I, we were kind of wedded at the hip doing several Robin projects. And then finally, we did an arc on Batman, a 3-issue arc on Batman. And that kind of showed Denny, I guess, that I could handle the character. And from there, him and his associate editors just piled me with work, eventually giving me Detective Comics and then Nightwing and other Bat-related titles, along with eventually a Robin Monthly. And it was a tremendous association, something I never dreamed would happen. I never really thought I'd ever get to write Batman. I'm a comic fan, so of course I loved Batman, but I never really ever dreamed that I would be that far into the mainstream on the most famous comic book character in the world. Let's face it. Um, and you know, 11 years, thousands and thousands of pages, hundreds of comics. I got to write a big chunk of Batman mythos. I got to play in Gotham for quite a long time, and I had fun doing it, and I never took it for granted. I sweated every page, every issue, to make it the best I could, because I wanted to, basically reward Denny's faith in me. And Denny is one of those editors, and also his associates, Jordan Gorfinkel and Scott Peterson and Darren Vincenzo. They were all the kind of editors who hired you because they felt you were right for the job, and then they let you go. They gave you a free hand. In some cases, even when they disagreed with me. Of course, when Denny disagreed with me, that was different. But when his three Batcave uh, junior members, when they disagreed with me, sometimes they'd let me fall flat on my face. But just to show me the error of my ways. Anyway, it was a great association, 11 years writing Batman. And that's how it started, out of the blue. Just sort of reached out for me, and and made me a member of the team. Okay, Jeff Roberts asks, when doing a multiple character book, how difficult is it to get their voices right? Um, yeah, ensemble books where you have a large cast, you have to think, you have to make sure that Flash doesn't sound like Green Lantern, who sounds like Superman, who sounds like Batman, and you have to establish in your head a voice for all of them, for all the different characters. And this kind of happens organically, happens naturally. And if I'm stuck for a voice, I might think about an actor, or I might think about somebody I know. When I was writing Airboy, every word that Skywolf said was something that my father might have said. And in some cases, things my father did say. So I very much based Skywolf's voice on my father. And then you've got accents, which I try to avoid. You want to avoid dialects and accents because it gets tiresome to read, and it gets you in a tight corner sometimes. The only time for me accents work is for comedic purposes, or if the characters are aliens. I love writing, establishing an alien's voice pattern and pronunciation pattern. Because I figure aliens would have speech impediments because their mouths aren't like ours. So when they speak English, they would speak it differently. So you just figure, so a lot of it is not conscious, and sometimes it is. Nightwing, when I wrote Nightwing, I consciously wanted him not to sound like Batman. So Nightwing speaks far less formally than Batman does. A lot more contractions. He's not as worried about grammar. He's not afraid to use words like gonna and wanna, and talks more like a normal Northeast corridor, urban raised guy would talk. So I wanted Nightwing to be a little more blue collar than Batman. Um, and So that's it. You just kind of have to keep it straight in your head, and you have to hear the voices as you write them, and that helps to keep you honest. So I know I'm not a whole lot of help here because it's just like it's something you can either do or not do. And I do a series, a prose novel series, Bad Times, and it has a large ensemble of like military people and people from different time periods and things like that. And sometimes I've got to sweat that a little more because there's so much more dialogue in a prose novel than there is in a comic book. And I try to keep the characters so that you can recognize individual idiosyncrasies in their speech. But something I like to write when I write military stuff, and military guys I've talked to a lot of vets about this, is that when a military unit serves together for a long time, they develop a patois, a sort of shorthand kind of conversation between each other, and I try to capture that. So they're pretty much speaking with one voice, which would make you think it's easier to write, but no, it isn't, because it has to have a really natural flow, and it has to sound honest. It has to sound like the way guys talk. And I've spoken to a lot of Iraq and Afghanistan vets, and I've given them my books and everything else. And a few of them have said, "Yeah, you did. You captured the way we talk." And it's from a lot of time spent listening to them talk to me and listening to them talk to each other. Um, and my inroad to that was writing GI Joe. I ran into so many vets, young vets, when I was writing GI Joe at conventions, and I just sort of hang out with them for a while. And mostly, I just listen to them talk to each other, ball busting and all that. And I try to capture that feel. So yeah, voices are something you got to think about, and a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't. I'm reading a run of Avengers from the '90s right now for some reason. I'm rereading it, and one of the things that strikes me is that the writer, did not pay as much attention to the voices, um, and so a lot of the dialogue is interchangeable, and you don't want that. You don't want your dialogue to be, well, Black Panther said it, but it just as easily could have been Captain America. No, no, the two have to have a very distinctive speech pattern. And, Captain America especially, you've got to get that right, or it doesn't sound like Cap. Okay, what do we got here next? What's your favorite aspect of the Punisher, please? Well, the Punisher would never say please, and that's one of my favorite aspects. The Punisher basically has every negative male stereotype, including never feeling remorse or regret or guilt. And boy, wouldn't that be great? Of course, it'd make you less human, but wouldn't it be great to go through life just doing as you please and not really giving a damn about how anybody thought about you or what you were doing? Um, Obviously, his courage, his dogged determination, I like that about the Punisher. But what I like most about writing the Punisher is his ability to get himself into trouble. Punisher, as I've said before, causes all of his own problems, and that kind of makes creating stories for him, at least for me, very easy. He's not a detective. There's never a mystery. There might be reveals. There's a lot he doesn't know going into a story, and we discover that with him. But Punisher plot lines are never terribly complex. But it's the nuances in a Punisher story that are most important, and that's what you need to worry about. It's the little things, and his sense of humor. He doesn't have a sense of humor, but he's funny. Um, so yeah, that's what I like most about the Punisher himself. And it's kind of a negative, dark wish fulfillment fantasy. The Punisher. He literally is an anti-hero. It's the opposite of a superhero, of where I would be powerful and good and people would love me. The Punisher is the opposite of all of that. All right, David Finn from Down Under. He says, outside of Batman, who was your favorite member of the Bat family to write? Well, no contest. It's Alfred. Alfred. I could write Alfred, particularly Alfred and Tim Drake scenes forever. The way he interacts, the way he sort of stands outside the action for the most part and comments on it. And writing his terse, acerbic judgments of everything that Bruce does. I love. Also the fact that he's a conscience for Bruce, even though Bruce, doesn't ever seem to listen to him. Particularly in Nightwing Year One, I love the byplay between Alfred and Dick Grayson, where Alfred is every bit the mentor to Dick Grayson that Bruce is. And the dry British wit, especially after I started writing a lot of Batman, I began reading a lot of P.G. Wodehouse and Jeeves, Bertie Wooster's erstwhile and loyal manservant, his valet. Sort of helped me mold my idea, not my version of Alfred, because I want to write the classic version of Alfred, but my ideas about Alfred were molded somewhat, especially by Wodehouse's dialogue and Jeeves's phrasing. Jeeves's way of being condescending without appearing to be, and also Jeeves's pride in being a servant. There used to be pride in servitude, that you did your best. You served your client or your master or whoever. You served not in a slavish way. You were a paid employee, but you did the best job, and your reputation for doing that job was important to you and closely held. You did not consider yourself a member of the working class. You were a member of the servant class, and close to nobility. And that's pretty much, Alfred is pretty much approaching his relationship with Bruce Wayne as though Bruce Wayne were a nobleman, rather than a member of American aristocracy. But Alfred, yeah, I just loved writing Alfred. So next question is, Michael Reisner or Reisner, to my knowledge, Graham Nolan and yourself only worked on Superman one time with that awesome book, Superman the Odyssey. I think you guys might have done a short story in an annual. I can't remember. We didn't. Anyway, was there any reason in particular you guys didn't do any more with Superman? Well, I was at DC for 11 years, and my history with Superman is kind of weird. Um, for one thing, Mike Carlin, who was the group editor of Superman, never, ever, ever once in 11 years hired me to do any work. Now, he had his own team. He had, Dan Jurgens and Roger Stern and, those guys, Jerry Ordway. He didn't need me on Superman for the most part. So I understood that, we weren't hiring any of them to do Batman. So, it was two different offices. I get it. And I got along great with Mike. Mike, in fact, helped me out a couple of times with some, inside information I needed to know at DC editorial. Because as a freelancer, you're kind of divorced from what's going on in the offices. You're not there every day. So he told me a few times, like basically where I stood, which was, I appreciated very much. This is very helpful to know that because, it staves off freelancer paranoia. Um, but yeah, and it was Graham who proposed, and as you see on the cover, Graham is listed first. Graham proposed the plot lines of the story to Mike Carlin, and Carlin liked it, and Graham wanted me to, assist him on the writing. Basically, Graham came up with a plot, which we discussed quite a bit, and then I wrote the finished script, and I think Graham might have suggested a couple of changes, but it was a total collaboration on this. So I think that's the reason it sailed through with Mike. So I wasn't hired by Mike. I was just sort of brought on as a someone else to work on it, along with Mike. Now, um, but outside of working on the core Superman titles, I did, get to do some Superman, and I like Superman. I like Superman as a character. Um, One of the key things I did with Superman was he was there at the death of Oliver Queen. I've discussed in another video, I think, how that came to be, why Superman was there. I still don't really know why Superman was there. They just told me Superman had to be there when Ollie died. So this awesome page of Superman witnessing Oliver's death, as drawn by Rodolfo DiMaggio. Uh, and so, I was free to use Superman in different places, but didn't often get to work on him directly. Now, I did an issue of Action Comics, uh, but Mike Carlin had moved on as group editor, and Eddie Berganza had taken over as Superman group editor. And Eddie had a habit of hiring me at the last minute to do jobs. The regular writer on Action Comics, for whatever reason, fell down and hurt himself, or well, I don't know what happened, but he couldn't meet the deadline, and Eddie knew I could. So I think I jumped. I think I had a week. I mean, from start to finish. I mean, I was like told on a Monday, had to be in by Thursday, kind of deal. And so I wrote a one-off Superman story that had Nightwing in it, and mostly I was inspired by the work of Kelly Puckett. Kelly Puckett had around this time or previously in the year or so previously written a couple of stories about Superman and Robin, and Superman's relationship with Dick Grayson, and then how that complicated the relationship between Dick Grayson and Batman, because Batman in our continuity at the time did not trust Superman 100% because Superman was not human in Batman's eyes. And Kelly wrote some marvelous stories laying all of this out. Just you got to find them. I can't give you issue numbers or anything like that, but look up Kelly Puckett, find any stories that he wrote with Superman and Dick Grayson. Kelly is one of the most underrated comic writers of the 90s and early 2000s. Just did genius work. I mean, every one of his stories is a polished gem, and that's what inspired me. When I got a shot at, hey, would you like to write an issue of Action, and we needed it in a hurry, I thought, well, let me build on what Kelly had started. My other involvements with Superman didn't actually come from DC Comics. I did a mini series for Dark Horse, a crossover, Superman and Tarzan, with Carlos Meglia, just genius artist, doing the artwork, and and that led to a Superman Aliens crossover, also brought to me by Dark Horse. And initially, they wanted me to do a direct sequel to Dan Jurgens' Aliens Superman thing, which I greatly admired. It's one of my favorite, probably is my favorite superhero movie crossover thingy. I know that's a narrow category, but Dan did such a great job. I cannot do a direct sequel to that because I felt I would be stepping on Dan's toes, or like, I don't know. It was be presumptive of me to try to do a sequel to what he had done. So I proposed an entirely different idea. I said, let me loose with Superman and Aliens and Kirby's Fourth World, the New Gods and Mr. Miracle and all that gang. And it was up to DC, and DC approved, and we went to town. And wow, if you've never seen this, even if you hate my writing, you got to get this because it's gorgeous. John Bogdanov, Superman artist extraordinaire, inked by Kevin Nolan, and it is just beautiful. And it's action packed, and you get all the Kirby stuff mixed with all the alien stuff. My favorite scene is Darkseid, you know, crushing a face hugger in his hand, just letting the acid, roll down his arm. Um, anyway, but that's not my Superman involvement. Didn't end there. And here's the oddest thing I've ever done is in the lobby of DC Comics, and this was in New York, and they tell me to they moved it to LA. It's in their uh, offices in Burbank. Um, Somebody, and I can't remember who, asked me if I would write a sample, basically iconic Superman page, just one page, like it was the page from a story, and they would have artists draw it and show the various stages of completion of a comic book page, from script to finished art. And I to this day don't know why they picked me, except once again, they probably had a tight deadline and they needed to get it done in a hurry. Somebody said they were going to do it and then forgot. Uh, so there's, first thing you see when you get off the elevators is a page I wrote, which I'm proud of. That's pretty cool, isn't it? I like that. And, you know, there you go. That's my involvement with Superman. And like I said, I do like Superman. I like Superman as a character. I think there's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of room to explore, which a lot of people don't think. They think he's a Boy Scout, he's dull, he's flat, there's nothing more to say. I'm sorry, there's no end to Superman. He's a fascinating character. Clark Kent is a fascinating character. And anyway, there you go. That's my thing on Superman, my history. All right. Ron Fortier asks, what's the best compliment you ever got? Okay, well, um, the most welcome compliment I get, and I get it, once in a while, and it's my favorite compliment, is just from normal readers. And they'll say, a guy will come up to me at a store appearance or a con and say, yeah, I was sorting through my comics recently. Basically, he was looking for stuff to bring for me to sign. And he says, and they all say this, and he or she. And I was surprised at how many comics by you I own. That's a terrific compliment because it means they weren't seeking my work out, but they enjoyed my stories. I mean, that's a much better compliment than I'm your biggest fan or whatever. That, I like your writing and I was surprised. I was just sort of intuitively buying stuff by you. Or you wrote a story that interested me and it continued and I just kept buying it. So it's like, and I was the same way. I was stunned, many, many years ago when I was a fan, when I finally sorted through my comics and found out how many issues of Brave and Bold I owned. It's like, I don't even remember consciously buying Brave and Bold every month, but apparently I did. Bought it every month for years. So anyway, the greatest compliment I've ever gotten was from Stan Lee. I never met Stan Lee personally, but we were working on a project. We worked on a couple of projects together. And because it was Stan Lee Media and he had lots of hangers on and an entourage, every time I talked to Stan, it was a conference call. And there were any number of guys on the call with him. And of course, they all want to get their 2 cents in. and we were talking about a comic we were going to do. We were doing for Archie called The Governator, and it was Arnold Schwarzenegger as a superhero, a costume vigilante. Silly idea, but we were having fun, and Arnold kind of ruined it all by um, his little peccadillo with the housemaid. So the 3 issues we worked on never saw publication. But we were in the middle of a conference call, and all of these guys who I don't know who they are. I didn't know who they were then. I don't know who they are now. But they were, Stanley apparatchiks. And they're like saying, well, you should do this and do this and do this. And I'm getting all these directions. Conference calls are a pain in the ass. They always are. And um, so in the middle of getting hammered by these guys with all these suggestions and me hastily making post-it notes to try to keep up with them, Stan goes, oh, hold it, guys. Leave Chuck alone. He knows what he's doing. Well, okay, there you go. I was intolerable for the rest of the day. Stan Lee said that I knew what I was doing. So there you go. My best compliment. All right. Jesse Hansen, what was the most pivotal point in your professional career? Well, I've been around a while and I won't go away. So there's been a few pivotal points, but I can cover some of the major ones here. First of all, my involvement with Eclipse Comics, my first real paying regular comic work. And I can thank Timothy Truman for getting me in there. He recommended me to Cat Ironwood, who was their editor-in-chief. Um, and I did some anthology work for them on their horror titles and their science fiction titles. And, Cat liked what she saw. And then eventually she was in talks with Tim Truman about Airboy. The Eclipse had discovered that Airboy was now public domain, this great Golden Age character. And I was there at Tim's house when he got the call. And I overhear him mentioning Airboy, and I'm like, Airboy? And then I'm next thing I know, I'm on the call. And it's, I said, yeah, I know Airboy. I know Airboy from Steranko's History of the Comics, and I've actually read a lot of Airboy Golden Age issues. And I loved Airboy. I used to draw Airboy on my notebook in high school. Nobody knew who he was, but I thought the character was terrific. So, they took me on to write it. And Tim Truman edited, I think, the first 12 or so issues. And this was my first regular, bi-weekly gig, because Airboy, when it started out, came out every 2 weeks. And I proved to them my reliability. I could keep up with a bi-weekly schedule and hand in, interesting stuff with likable characters, and my stories made sense. And they kept on using me, and this went on for 50 issues. My other big break, which happened almost simultaneously with Airboy and the Eclipse stuff, was Larry Hama accepting a bunch of my scripts for a new comic magazine he was doing called Savage Tales. And, they happened, the work at Eclipse and the work at Marvel happened simultaneously and independently. Larry didn't know who I was, where I had worked, and couldn't give a damn about either. All he cared about was what I could do for him. And I sent him stuff, and he liked it, and he bought it, and assigned some terrific artists. And I worked on a lot of issues of Savage Tales before its cancellation. And in the meantime, Larry took me on writing backups in Savage Sword of Conan for King Kull, and eventually the lead feature in Savage Sword, which, I wrote Conan off and on for about 5 years in Savage Sword. So my other big, turn was getting to go to DC and work on all their fantastic characters, getting invited by Denny O'Neil to join the Batman team, and which led directly to the creation of Bane, which I guess is, that's my calling card. I doubt very much I will ever again do anything as impactful in the comics arena as the creation of a new Batman villain that is now a permanent, iconic member of the Batman Rose Gallery. I mean, that's not even a once in a lifetime thing. That's like a once in a generation thing. Not everybody gets to do that. I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity. Now, every career has its turns for the best, and I've just shown you a bunch of them. But there's always the turn for the worst. After leaving CrossGen, I had a couple of years there that I refer to as the wilderness. That's what Winston Churchill referred to his time out of office, and out of favor in Britain as the wilderness. And I had to scrabble. I had to, write for video games. I just, get any work I could. And there were some lean years there until things picked up again. Basically engineered my own comeback in the indies and the rest. But I was writing. The only regular work I had for a number of years was writing the occasional Simpsons story for Bongo. But the rest of the time I was writing damn near anything I could get my hands on, and it was rough sledding. It taught me, I don't know about humility because I've never been a terribly prideful person, but it taught me the value even more than I had thought before of constantly thinking ahead to your next job. And but I'm out of the wilderness now. I'm busier than ever. Got tons of stuff to do, and the phone ringing again, which is good. That is a good thing. Busy is good. All right, Mike Igo. I hope I pronounced that right. What would be your approach to a revival of DC's Space Cabbie series? I don't know if that's meant as a joke or whatever, but Space Cabbie was this kind of odd character in Mystery in Space back in the 50s. And the kind of character that only DC Comics could come up with. And as the title suggests, he was a cab driver who had a cab that could fly through outer space. And I think I've read some of the stories, but I'm sure they're forgettable, in a fun way. But yeah, what would I do? Well, it's kind of weird because it it's sort of thinking about it, and I never really thought about it before. Thinking about it led me to sort of a Luc Besson trifecta. I thought about there's a series of movies called Taxi, and they're only distributed in France and Europe and Asia, and they're produced by Luc Besson, and they're car chase comedies for the most part, and they're funny. The first four are very, very good and very funny, and sort of a I don't know, sort of a wacky slob hero James Bond kind of feel to them. Sylvester Stallone has a uncredited scene in one of them that's funny, and that led me to thinking about Transporter. Yeah, Space Cabbie would be more like Transporter, even more of a tough guy, like Jason Statham in the Transporter movies. And then, of course, slap myself in the head, an actual Space Cabbie, Luc Besson's Fifth Element, where Bruce Willis is, wisecracking as he does as a cab driver in a dystopic, futuristic New York City. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious that's the approach I would like to take, and I'm sure that was the original stories too, where, he picks up a fare that turns out to be dangerous or threatening or of importance to the continued existence of a peaceful universe. And, that's just sort of where I would go with it. I just think it's a natural extension of the 1950s character and a way to update it. A little bit more of a tough guy. All right, Scott Heilman. I would love to know what your average workday and or work week is like for you. You're not only a prolific writer with multiple projects in various stages of development, but you're a voracious reader. You're a connoisseur of action crime movies from around the world, collector of action figures. As a husband, I'm sure your wife has honey-do lists for you. Your kids and grandkids, there's no grandkids yet, probably vie for your attention, plus a million other things we fans don't know about the secret of Chuck Dixon's time management. Oh, it's just an idyllic, wonderful experience. I just get up in the morning and write and write and write and write and write. Oh, yes, it's fabulous. And, I only interrupted by trips to the mailbox to find it stuffed with royalty checks. Oh, yes, the life of a writer. Yeah, it's a lot more like this all day long. Except I'm staring at a blank screen and curse you, internet. I'm leaping to see what folks are saying on Facebook or checking emails. But my actual workday is I get up, I have breakfast, sit down, do some work. Middle of the day, take break for lunch, get on the treadmill for a while maybe, come back and do another afternoon stint I'm generally working from like 10 in the morning effectively till maybe 6 at night. Or if I'm on a roll, I work later. I will work, deep into the night if I'm on a roll. And there's no sense to stop. Um, and then, another part of it is, the research. I've got to write with some level of authority. I mean, recently I started writing Westerns, and they require a good deal of reading, a good deal of looking stuff up, because you don't want to get that stuff wrong. The only time I did more research was when I was working in El Cazador, because I had to learn all that nautical stuff, which I didn't know anything about. So the characters sounded like they weren't just shouting out, gibberish. Um, and what they were talking about and their actions actually related to realistic sailing techniques. I remember Steve Epting and I even looking at books of knots. So research can take up quite a bit of time unless it's a subject area I'm already conversant in. But you got to leave time for life. You know, you got to live a little. I'm kind of glad that I didn't get to write comics as a young guy like so many guys did breaking in. They either got right out of high school, right out of college, became interns, and started, uh, writing for the bigs. I really didn't get going full time as a writer till I was 32, and I'd have some time to live, had some time to have a life, some experiences, and but you got to have that because you got to have something real, something you can relate to write on. So you got to take time off from writing to actually experience a few things and have something to talk about. As Larry Hama once told me, don't write about a human relationship until you've had one. Well, I was fresh out of a divorce when I started working for Larry, so I had all the human experience that I cared to have for a while. And then, but the rest of my work week looks pretty much like a mishmash. Every once in a while, school will contact me and they'll say, "Well, we'd love to have some students come over and watch you work. Spend a work day with you." And I said, "Well, that'd be terrible because they're gonna just see a guy staring at a screen all day. They'd probably, you know, negatively affect their work ethic to watch me working because I don't appear to be doing anything. And sometimes I suspect my family thinks I'm not doing anything, and the only proof I have is when a check comes. They didn't pay me this for nothing, or when the comps come and they have my name on them. It's like proof that that sitting in the office all day by yourself, apparently seeming to fool around, actually brings in the bread. So okay, well that's it for this session. Um, I've got a bunch of these videos up on Yahoo, or not Yahoo, YouTube, but I got a lot more videos up at Unauthorized TV. It is a subscription service. I've got my own channel there. Got a lot of videos where I go even more in depth on some of the things you've asked about today than I did in this segment. And I'd really appreciate it if you check it out. So this is Chuck Dixon. Um, I will be doing more of these question and answers. So feel free to fire away. And that's about it. I'll see you down the road.